There have been some bad gimmicks in WWE. We know this, we laugh about this. Some people put Repo Man in that category as well, but they get it wrong. It's always going to happen given how many creation Vince McMahon has thrown out there, because as the law of averages states, they can't all be winners. Why that meant we had to have beaver cleavage, I'll never know, but I instantly regret bringing that up. In a fascinating twist of events though, some wrestlers have taken this character, left WWE and made it far more compelling and darker on the outside. It cemented some wrestlers' careers, and that just goes to show sometimes you gotta let individuals fly their own way. A good idea is a good idea. Who am I talking about though? Well, I'm gonna tell ya. I'm Simon from What Culture, and this is 8 wrestling gimmicks that were much darker outside WWE. Number 8, Haku. A man who actually tried to kill me, which sums this up before I've even explained it. Haku was known backstage as a tough SOB. The stories of his exploits are legendary, but as Haku in WWE, well, that's all he was. He was just Haku, because everyone in front of the camera is portrayed as a badass, so in that sense, he wasn't really able to stand out. After jumping ship to WCW though and becoming Meng, because 4-letter names were all the rage, he soon found himself in Kevin Sullivan's Dungeon of Doom. Now everybody in that stable had to be really screwed up, so the story behind Meng transformed into a genuine killer who had done away with people on behalf of the Emperor of Japan. True, it was said that he had done this with the Tongan death grip, which poured water on that story a tad, but I suppose that still has the word death in it. Point was, Meng was a murderer. That was a far cry away from what he had seen before and added a whole new dimension to his gimmick. It was one that transcended the product as well. Soon, whether he was Meng or Haku, everybody knew you didn't screw with him, otherwise you would be in a bad situation. Number 7, Goldust. Goldust was a different kind of wrestling character. Based on the idea of an Oscar statuette come to life, it got so sexualized and at times weird in the mid-90s, some anti-WWE campaigners wanted it off their televisions. They weren't successful with that, but it did stop his push. He was meant to have a feud with one Stone Cold Steve Austin, but that was scrapped when the backlash got too much. The outsiders had won, and I'm not talking about Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. What I would like to know though is what these people thought of his stint in WCW. Transforming into 7, the 1998 version seemed to be a possible sex offender. I don't know if that was the intent, but seeing him hanging outside a kid's bedroom did nothing to argue against it, especially because he wanted this child to get into his van. It was truly screwed up. It caught the ire of other individuals, which was no surprise, and Turner Standard and Practices told WCW to stop it, and stop it right now. I mean, even I agree with this. It was pitched terribly and didn't help anyone. There was also this idea that it was WCW trying to create their own version of The Undertaker, and if that is true, they threw the ball and missed the mark by around about 42,000 feet. Number 6, Kamala. In 1983, Skandor Akbar unleashed his latest monster to try and finally stop the Von Erichs. Dubbed Kamala at the time, the Ugandan giant waved a spear, painted his face, and it was all incredibly offensive. African stereotypes like this had no place in wrestling or anywhere else. It was almost portrayed as an animal too, with most of his matches ending in a DQ where he would ruin his opponents. It even happened when he took on Harley Race for the NWA title. Why he cared about championship gold, I don't know, but he just couldn't help himself. He was so out of control, the referee stopped the whole thing. This was the same story when he made it to WWE as Kamala, and Vince McMahon gave him his own spin. Taking on Hulk Hogan once again for the title, it was a double countout because yes, things got out of hand, and even before all of this, Kamala had devoured a live chicken. What is wrestling? When we got to the 1992 version, however, WWE changed him massively and kinda made him sympathetic. It was still in bad taste, but now the giant was trying to escape his handlers who were keeping him in activity. I know. He even replicated this in the ring when he took on The Undertaker at SummerSlam and spent most of his time running away because he was just so scared. So things still weren't great, but he was far less terrifying under McMahon's watch for better or worse. Usually, always worse. Number 5, Doink. The original incarnation of Doink was truly screwed up. More Pennywise than Bobo, it was the juxtaposition that got you. Here was your run-of-the-mill clown in look, but the way he behaved was horrific. Even his music doubled down on that. You weren't meant to laugh at him, you were meant to feel really uncomfortable. The problem was, when Matt Bourne was doing this in the early 90s, WWE's main audience was kids. Throw in Bourne's behind-the-scene drug issues and WWE fired him before turning Doink into your as-expected clown. He even even had a mini version called Dink. This was as friendly as they come. When Matt popped up in ECW though, he was able to take the original idea and make it even more bonkers. Half himself and half his creation, Bourne had proper split personality disorder, and seeing him jump from one to the next resulted in some dark moments. I mean, he did start referring to himself as Bourne again with his last name in place of the actual spelling, and that was a little on the nose, but we can let it slide. So while a lot of people roll their eyes when Doink comes up, there was something here. It just never followed the original plan. Number 4, Sir Mo. Remember Men on the Mission? Every chance you don't, but you will remember Mabel, or Viscera, Big Vis, the sexual love machine. He was the guy out of that team that stayed in WWE's good graces, whereas the other part of that pairing, Mo, did not. He was out of the company before long, and when he found himself in the USWA, they actually came up with something they could do with him. Recast as Sir Mohammed, he became the leader of a black supremacist group known as the Nation of Domination. Yep, this is where it all began. Now, this didn't mean that Mo became an overnight sensation, and really this stable did nothing until it got to the main roster in WWE, and even then it was completely unrecognizable, but still, if it wasn't for this man, we may never have had it, and if the Nation didn't exist, maybe Rocky Maivia would never have become The Rock. Therefore, Mo from Men on the Mission is responsible for the most successful person to ever fly from the pro wrestling nest. You learn something new every day. Number 3, the Bushwhackers. In 1993, not only were the Bushwhackers in a match many considered one of the worst of the year, but they also scooped the Wrestling Observer Worst Team Award. That is not great. This is why when you find out what the New Zealanders were doing before the WWE, you will not believe it, and I still don't. Known as the Sheep Herders, Luke and Butch were considered one of the most hated and violent tag teams there was. They got major heat wherever they went, and the amount of blood spilled with these guys would give Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes a run for their money. Some of their UWF barbed wire matches too? Good grief. The question then is why when Vince McMahon laid eyes on them, he decided they'd best be used as a comedy pairing that waved their arms and licked people's heads. I mean, it's a mystery. I can't be too mad at it because as a child I love all this and it's why I remember them today, but what a change. I promise that whatever you have in your head too is not as mad as these two were. They were the most hardcore of hardcore. In fact, it could be why they accepted this gig. It must have been far nicer on their bodies, and they likely made more cash. I take it all back. Number 2, Raven. Described by Stone Cold Steve Austin as a missed opportunity during his WWE run, Raven was kind of seen as a literal bird under Vince McMahon, hence why he had a squawk at the start of his entrance music. There's even stories of McMahon being astounded that he had been hired back after a not-so-great run as Johnny Polo in the 90s. But for all of this, however, the character was truly dark. After leaving WWE and arriving in ECW, he repackaged himself as a grungy asshole who loved Nirvana. Dubbing himself Raven, the whole persona was a reminder that life is meaningless and that being a sociopath is the way to go. Focusing all of this rage on childhood friend Tommy Dreamer, ECW got 3 years out of this feud as Dreamer fought desperately and mostly failed to get the better of him. It was great. Raven was also riddled in controversy when he tried to crucify the Sandman, which appalled her watching Kurt Angle so much he almost decided never to go back to pro wrestling ever, and even a jump to WCW kept most of this alive. It wasn't as mad, but his flock and general demeanor certainly did captivate audiences. Once World Championship Wrestling was dead though, Raven was back in the Fed, and it didn't work mostly as by then, he was just a dude that was named after an animal. There was never any attempt to tap into what this creation was, and he slowly faded into the background. Number 1, Seth Rollins. Seth Rollins' latest character is definitely his darkest yet in the WWE. Basically a cult leader who's lost his mind. You'd be forgiven thinking this was the craziest he's ever gone, but that is not the case. As Tyler Black back in Ring of Honor, he joined the group known as Age of the Fall under the watchful eye of Jimmy Jacobs. And do you know what one of their first acts was? They hung up Jay Briscoe from a belt hook on a lighting rig. Blood then dripped down from their victim as he dangled from the ceiling like a butchered animal, saturating Jacobs' shirt and at one point trickling into his mouth. So disgusting was the scene that Ring of Honor removed the footage from the event pay-per-view. They never went back to being this screwed up for obvious reasons, but they did carry on until Black had earned the respect of the fans through his excellent ring work and turned on Jacobs. He then moved on to becoming the Ring of Honor champion, which was also the catalyst to him getting a deal in WWE. I'm pretty sure they don't see it that way, but I like to think this attempted murder in the ring was what really gave him his break. And when you think about it, what on earth has wrestling not done. Know of any other wrestling gimmicks that were much darker outside of WWE? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then head over to whatculture.com and read yourself some articles. Follow What Culture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE, and watch more videos here on What Culture Wrestling. My name is Simon from What Culture, and I'm going to talk to you again soon.